Ideas define who we are.
Ideas sustain and protect us.
They inspire.
And challenge us.
Ideas compel us to take moral action.
For generations, the Bet Midrash is where Jewish ideas have been generated, debated, and refined.
With more than 100 faculty and fellows,
and reaching thousands of Jewish learners
and leaders,
Jewish ideas are not just intellectual.
They spark audacious action. The Hartman Institute is reimagining the Jewish people, the State of Israel, and Judaism itself as they should be.
Religiously and politically pluralistic.
Courageous.
Passionate.
Hartman empowers Jewish leaders and strengthens our communities.
Our ideas shape an agenda for Jewish life in North America and Israel.
We hope you'll join us in boldly imagining what comes next for the Jewish people.
Welcome to the conversation.
I'm going to talk about faith this morning. Faith. About a religious worldview. That's not so easy to do. One reason, at least, is that in an American context, of which most of you are part, if not all, faith is invariably personal. We actually don't want faith to be in conversations in public life, and we get somewhat antsy to angry if they do, especially if we're liberal, right? Think about what's gone on in the Supreme Court in America this week. Part of the conversation is actually the question of the role of faith and the role of religion. And in America, that's actually very tense. It's very tense. It's not just whose religion, it's any religion. The second reason why I think it's difficult to talk about faith is because God's not visible. Like, sensory-wise, God is not visible. Which means that no matter what we're taught by our parents, by our synagogues, by our schools, by our anything, we actually have to make a choice. We have to make a choice to believe in God, to have a relationship with God. Is that nature that does that? Is that nurture that does that? Is that doctrine that does that? Personal experience? You know, I'll say for myself, when I think about what motivates my own faith, it's my observations in the world that human beings are not great at running things. And I just see what people do to each other, and I say to myself, well, unless there's someone greater, more aware, who's taking stock of all this, then we're in big trouble, and I'm not sure what it's all worth. And then I overlay it with the Jewish version of it, right? The doctrine and the books and the beliefs and all that. But it comes from a very personal place. But I have to say, I don't think Judaism is primarily a personal religion. I think it is a public religion. It is actually about the ongoing drama of the covenant between God and the Jewish people. And to be honest, a lot of our rituals really indicate that and reflect that. We pray in the plural. We don't pray in the plural just because we care about other people. We pray in the plural because the basis of the covenant is not my relationship with God, it's our relationship with God as a people. Our holidays represent historical events and agricultural celebrations of the Jewish people, not of me individually. And so, as difficult as it is to talk about a God that you can't see, and as difficult as it is to talk about God with people who are used to God being relegated to the private and asking whether it's an essential service to talk to God or not, I'm going to talk about it. And the way I want to talk about it is I want to talk about it in answering why Israel. And my answer to why Israel, I'm actually going to read it. Because Israel, which to me means the autonomous presence of the Jewish people in the land of Israel, is part of Judaism. the covenantal drama between God and the Jewish people. And Judaism as a religion is missing part of its essence without it. This might seem obvious to people sitting in this room, but I actually think that this notion is becoming more and more contested within the American Jewish community. See last night, for example, a comment about Jews being cosmopolitans. I'm actually going to push against that today. Not because I don't think it's of value to be cosmopolitan, but because I don't think it's the only value of Judaism. So let's talk theology. I want to talk to you today about two covenants, two britot, that you can find in our founding document in the Bible, in Tanakh. One is called the Covenant of Sinai, Brit Sinai, and the other is called the Covenant of Zion, which is another word for Jerusalem or Israel, which is what Zionism comes from clearly, Brit Zion. Looking at these two covenants, we're going to see what dimensions each of them brings to Judaism. And I'm certainly not the first person to suggest that these two covenants are deeply active within the Tanakh and that they are separate. In fact, years ago, I think at this point, 9 years ago, 10 years ago, when I was reading for my comprehensives, which is basically, you have to read, we called it Bible to Boober. You have to read, everything about everything in Judaism. And I'm saying, I'm getting a PhD in Talmud. Why do I have to read everything about everything? But then I realized it's actually a good thing. It's a good idea. And as I was reading, sometimes you come across a book and it's just transformative and beautiful. And that book for me was John Levinson's Sinai and Zion. It is a thin volume and it is transformative in my view. And in much of my thinking today is directly influenced by him and that book. So first of all, the Brit Sinai, the Covenant of Sinai. What religious model does it present? What I mean by the Covenant of Sinai, is the revelation of Torah to the Israelites as it's told in the Bible after they leave Egypt through the mediation of Moses. I want to look at a few texts that give us a sense of what Sinai is. And that's where your source sheets are going to come in. We first meet Mount Sinai itself before anything communal happens with it. Moses is an asylum seeker, and he's fled Egypt to Midian, and he is watching his father-in-law's animals. And they end up in the wilderness. Source number one, please. I'm going to read in Hebrew and translate, okay? Verse 1. We're in Exodus chapter 3. So the beginning of the Exodus story. Umoshe haya ro'eh et tzon yitro chotno kohen Midian. And Moses was tending to the flock of Yitro, his father-in-law, who was the priest of Midian. Vayinhag et atzon achar hamidbar. And he drove the flock towards the wilderness. Vayavo el har Elohim Choreva. And he came to God's mountain, Chorev, which is another name for Sinai. So let me ask you, what do you first notice about Mount Sinai? From this verse alone, what do you first notice? Sorry? It's not, it doesn't seem to be in Midian proper. It's in the wilderness. The first thing we learn about Sinai is that it seems to be a no person's land. It is in the wilderness. It does not belong to anyone. It is outside of a human framework. Then we continue to see where this goes. Verse 2. Vayera malach Adonai elav belabat esh mitoch hasneh, and an angel of God appeared to him in a blazing fire from within the bush. Vayar, and he saw, this is Moses, v'hinei hasneh bo'er ba'esh v'hasneh nenu mukal, and he sees JTS's insignia emblazoned in the wilderness, and says, oh, look at this for you. If you haven't been there, they have the bush, and it's not consumed. That is it. So clearly this is something that's outside of nature. Vayomer Moshe, and verse 3, Vayomer Moshe Asura na ve'ereh tamareh hagadol hazeh madua lo yivar hasneh. He says, I got to see this amazing thing. I want to see something. A sensory experience. I want to see something. But almost as soon as he has the sensory experience, he gets a sense, wait a second, this isn't about a sensory experience. Vayar Adonai, and God saw, verse 4, Kisar lirot, that he had stopped off to see it. Vayikra elav Elohim mitoch hasneh, and God called to him from within the bush. Vayomer Moshe, Moshe says, Moses, Moses, Vayomer, God says, Moses, Moses, Vayomer hineni. By the way, I do make an effort not to call God by male pronouns. And I want to tell you why. The reason why I make that effort is because I worry that in calling God by male pronouns, we reinforce certain ways of thinking about leadership within the Jewish community itself. So I want to say that you're going to notice it. You might not like it. I get, you don't have to like it. But I just want to, it's happening. Right? You can disagree with me, and I'm happy to hear. Okay. So, God says, Moshe, and Moshe says, I'm here. Vayomer, God says, Al tikrav halom, don't come over here. You thought you were going to come here. You don't come over here. Stay back. Shal na'alecha me'al raglecha, take your shoes off. Ki hamakom asher ata omed alav admat kodeshu. Because this is holy ground. Take your shoes off. And this is where Moses realized, I thought I was going to come over here and see something and experience something, and now I'm realizing, Vayomer, and God says, Anochi Elohei Avicha, Elohei Avram, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, I am the God of your ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then Moses says, I'm not supposed to look at this. Vayaster Moshe Panav, and Moses hides his face, Ki Yarei Mehabit Ela Elohim. He is afraid to see God. This aspect is another central aspect of Sinai. Not only is it in a no person's land, it is in a place that is outside of human frameworks, but there is nothing to see here. You should not be looking. This is not something that you can set your eyes on. And in fact, lest we think that's an accident, does anybody recall that in the book of Deuteronomy, if you look in number 3, over and over again, the Jews are told, and the book of Deuteronomy is just full of this, over and over again, the Jews are told, and this is after the revelation at Sinai, verse 15 in Deuteronomy 4, be very careful, ki lo re'item kol tmuna, you did not see any image. When God spoke to you at Chorev, at Sinai, from the fire. This is not a place that you're supposed to see. Instead, what is it? It's a place where you're supposed to hear. Source 2. At the actual biblical revelation at Sinai, the people are not actually told to see God as much as they were told to heed God, to listen to God. And this is verse 5 in source number 2 in Exodus 19. Va'ata, and now, im shamoa tishma'u bekoli, if you will, really means obey. It doesn't physically mean hear, but it's using that sensory hear. If you will hear me, if you will listen to me, ushmartem et briti, and you will keep my covenant, v'item li sgula mikol ha'amim, you will be a treasure for me from all the nations, ki li kol ha'aretz, because all of the earth is mine. What do you hear at Sinai? Yeah, it's true, they see sounds and hear sounds. But what they really hear, and this is Brit Sinai par excellence, is what it is they have to do in order to earn the covenant. And I want you to notice that word im, if, in verse 5. It is conditional. The Israelites understand that. And in verse 8, what do they respond to this invitation? Vaya'anu kol ha'am yachdav, vayomru, and they say, kol asher diber Adonai na'aseh. Everything that God says, we will do. It's the last time we actually did that. Am I wrong? Vayashev Moshe et divrei ha'am el Adonai. And Moses returned the message to God. The first two aspects of Sinai, one, it is in no human framework. It is in the wilderness. It is outside of politics. It is outside of human proprietorship. Two, it is not a place where you are going to be able to have a sensory experience of God. You are not going to be able to see God. It is not about what you see around you. It's actually more about your imagination than it is about what you see. And three, it is a place that tells you what your responsibilities are, what you have to do. And I would say 3 prime is know that it's conditional. Implicitly, if you don't do these things, if you don't do what you promise you will do, then you're not going to be my treasured nation. That's Brit Sinai. Brit Zion, the covenant of Zion, is very, very different from Brit Sinai. Very, very different. And I want to say what I mean by Brit Zion. Brit Zion is some combination of a promise, a territorial promise of Jewish presence in this land, and an ongoing promise that even if they leave, they'll come back. Okay? Already you can start hearing how this may be different from Brit Sinai. Let's look at what we know about Brit Zion. And we'll start at the beginning. Breshit, chapter 13. Vadonai Amar el Avram, Acharei hipared Lot me'imo. And God spoke to Abraham after Lot separated from him. Remember, they have their separation. Lot goes to a place that he's going to regret, and Abraham goes where he goes. And God says, Sa na einecha, lift up your eyes, please, now. Ure'eh, and see min hamakom asher ata sham, from where you are, tzafona, north, vanegba, south, vakedma, east, v'yama, west. What do you notice immediately about Zion? You can see it. Not only can you see it, you should see it. Pasuk Tedvav, 15. Ki et kol haaretz asher ata ro'eh, for the whole land that you see, l'cha etnena, I'm going to give it to you. Ulezarecha, and to your progeny ad olam, forever. We'll talk about forever in a minute. Not only can you see it, verse 17, you can walk it. Kum hitalech ba'aretz, get up, walk in the land, le'orka, le'rochba, in its expanses, the length and the width, because I'm going to give it to you. Okay? Moses is told at Brit Sinai he's in a place that is no person's land. He does not want to see. He's not supposed to see. That is Brit Sinai. Brit Zion, look at this place. Don't take off your shoes and stay away. Put on your shoes and take a walk. And Tehillim, Psalm, says something even more powerful. Psalm 48, in number 6. Sobu Tzion va'kifua sifru migdalea. Walk around Zion and circle it. Count its towers. Shitu libchem lechela. Take note of its ramparts. Pasku armenoteha. Go through its citadels. Leman tisapru l'dor acharon, so that you can tell a future age about it. And this is a radical verse coming up right here. Ki zeh Elohim, for this is God. Eloheinu, our God. Olam va'ed, forever. Hu yenahagenu almut. God will lead us forever. this land is God? No. The verse doesn't mean this land is God. What it means is, Brit Zion, you can see God. Meaning you look around at the presence of the Jewish people within the land of Israel, and what you see is an actual sensory manifestation of the ongoing covenant between God and the Jewish people. We never go back to Sinai. It is not a place to go back to and to live in and to see. We continually in our history go back to Zion. It is a physical and immersive reflection of the ongoing covenant between God and the Jewish people. And to take us away from the Bible for a minute and into something very contemporary, but something that I think will resonate with us a lot and has always certainly resonated with me, if I can find it among all my little paper luch over here. I want to look at Zelda for a minute. She's in your appendix. Okay, so Zelda, for those who are not familiar, she's a 20th century Israeli poet. And her poetry is just magnificent. Marcia Falk, Rabbi Marcia Falk, I think. Perhaps Rabbi Dr. Marcia Falk. Dr. Marcia Falk? It's because I know doctor, but I thought also rabbi. But at least Dr. Marcia Falk, she translated Zelda's poems. And I have to tell you, in the introduction to her translation of Zelda's poems, she recounts an unbelievable story that it just tells you who these two women were, because Marcia Falk trained in the Reform movement, Zelda brought up in an ultra-Orthodox home. Talk about, and so Marcia Falk shows up at her house, and this is what Dr. Falk writes in the book. She shows up at her house wearing like a tichel, like a kerchief on her head because it was hot, but she's wearing sleeveless, and so she shows up at Zelda's door, and the first thing Zelda says to her, she says, ultra-Orthodox on top, something else on the bottom. Which I thought was just like, and then their relationship flowered and they spent years together and whatever. But just, just the thing. So Zelda has this famous poem, L'chol ish yesh shem. Everyone has a name. And what I'm so taken by, right, is I'm taken by the way that her poem actually talks about how place determines and shapes who people are going to be. So in the third stanza, right? L'chol ish yesh shem, everyone has a name, shenatnu lo haharim, that the mountains give them. V'natnu lo ktalav, and their walls give them. And I think it's interesting to think about Brit Zion, that Brit Zion is such a place, right? And it's almost suggesting that the covenant, it flowers in a certain way in a place. It's shaped in a particular place. It's not just anywhere. Like when the rabbis talk about why the Torah was given in the Midbar, Brit Sinai, in the wilderness, which you have in your appendix also, they basically said because anybody can come and get it, right? Anybody can come and get it. It's open, right? What does religion look like when it's not just no person's land, but it's in a place, right? So that's the other aspect, another major aspect of Brit Zion, is that actually it's not apolitical. It's not outside of human frameworks. Already in these verses, we see, L'cha etnena, I'm going to give it to you. Sinai is not given to anybody. Now, we could talk about who should have what today, but the point is it's not outside of politics. And in fact, when I introduced what Brit Zion was, I said Brit Zion is this amalgamation of, God promises the land that we will continually return to this land. Part of that is a promise of this Davidic dynasty that it will rule. And I want to look at it in Tehillim 89 with you, in Psalms 89. Because it presents Brit Zion as very much worldly. Like what Yossi was saying the other day, God's return to history. Very worldly and very political. Number 7, and you can find a parallel to this, I think, in the second book of Samuel as well. Az dibarta bechazon lachasidecha, you spoke to your faithful God, meaning God, you spoke to your faithful in a vision. Vatomer, and you said, Shiviti Ezer al Gibor, Harimoti Vachor Me'am. I gave power to a warrior, we're talking about David, and I have exalted a chosen one out of the people. Matzati David Avdi, I have found David my servant. B'shemen Kodshi Meshachtiv, I have anointed him with my sacred oil. Asher Yadi Tikon Imo Af Zroi Ta'amtenu. My hand will be with him, my arm shall strengthen him. And as a result, Lo Yashi Oyev Bo, Uven Avla Lo Yanenu, no enemy shall oppress him, no vile man will afflict him. V'chatoti mipanav tzarav u'misanav egof. I will crush his adversaries before him, and I will strike down those who hate him. Wow. Not apolitical. Right? This is not, we're not in, what do we say? We're not in Kansas anymore. We're not in the wilderness anymore. Right? We're very much in a state or in a place. I don't mean state like a contemporary state. I mean state as in a place that is autonomous and rulership and all that and politics. Brit Zion is much more political. And it's not just much more political, it is the second half of a whole. Brit Sinai is what we are supposed to do to earn the covenant with God. Brit Zion is what God promises us in return. It is God's grant to us. It is God's gift to us. And that shows up here as well. And yes, we can asterisk, we'll talk about the political things later, okay? Verse 25. Ve'emunati, my faithfulness, says God. Not your faithfulness, my faithfulness. Right? My ne'emanut, to you. My faithfulness to you. V'chasti imo, and my kindness are with him. Uvishmi tarum korno. And his horn should be exalted through my name. And I'm going to do all these things. And if Brit Sinai is presented as conditional, Brit Zion is presented in certain ways, and be careful about this, as unconditional. Take a look a few verses later. Verse 29. Le'olam, forever, eshmor lo chasdi uvriti ne'emenet lo. Forever I will give kindness to him, and my covenant is faithful to him. Visamti la'ad, and forever I will put Zaro, his progeny, v'chiso kimei shamayim, and his throne so long as the heavens last. Okay, but come on, what if people do bad stuff? What if he does bad things? We've known people to do bad things. And in fact, we don't always get to stay in the land. Verse 31. Im ya'azvu banav torati, if his sons, his children, leave my teachings, uv'mishpatai lo yelechun, and they don't follow my laws, im chukotai yechalelu, and if they violate my laws, u'mitzvotai lo yishmoru, and they don't observe my commandments, in other words, Brit Sinai, if they don't do what I told them they had to do in order to, ufakadati b'shevet pisham u'v'negaim avonam, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to punish them. That's what I'm going to do. But v'chasdi lo afir me'imo, but I will not lahafer, I will not nullify my kindness with him. V'lo ashaker be'emunati, and I will not betray my faithfulness. A few years ago, I was talking to a group of Muslim leaders here at the Machom. They're American, and they're in our Muslim Leadership Initiative program. And I had a very hard task. It was a week when Al-Aqsa was closed to worshipers, and a lot of them come to Jerusalem knowing that they're going to be able to go pray on Aqsa, and they couldn't. And I had to open the week. I want you to guess my topic. Thank God it wasn't the Temple Mount. It was Jewish chosenness. Thanks, colleagues who put me in that position. So I start talking about Jewish chosenness and perspectives on Jewish chosenness. There's basically two tracks, right? There's one track that says that Jews are inherently different from the rest of the world. That's a mystical track, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi track. And there's one track that says Jews have a responsibility and they have to choose to be chosen, essentially. Right? That's basically and of course the questions come, what about what are the political ramifications of either of these models? And I actually talked out what I thought the political ramifications were of each of these models. And then somebody raises their hand and they're like, wait. But we were taught that you guys corrupted your covenant, and so you've been superseded. And so are Christians taught that. So I said, well, actually, there was a follow-up question, which is, okay, so what does God do in your version of the covenant when you do bad stuff? So I said, God makes us sleep on the couch. That's Brit Zion. That's not Brit Sinai. Brit Sinai is if you do this, you got it. If you don't do it, you're out. Brit Zion is, I will punish you if you do bad. There is such a thing as doing bad, and there being consequences for that. So it's not completely unconditional, but I will not break that essential covenant. That is Brit Zion. Without Brit Zion, we don't have that in our theology. Take a look, continuing in that chapter in Tehillim, verse 35. Lo achalel briti, I will not violate my covenant. I want you to look at that word achalel. In verse 32, that was exactly the word that is used for the way the people treated the covenant. Im chukotai yechalelu, even if they're going to basically make a joke, make an embarrassment out of my covenant, I will not do that. Umotzas vatai lo ashaneh, and I will not change what I said. Achat nishbati bekodshi, I have sworn by my holiness, im le David achazev, I will not lie to David. Zar'o le'olam yihiyeh, his line will continue forever. V'chiso kashemesh negdi, and his seat, just like we said, it's going to be kimei shamayim, like the days of the heavens. It will be like the sun before me. And then it goes on. Brit Zion. It is something you can see, you can walk, you can be immersed in, you can be shaped by, you can experience as a covenantal religious experience. And many of us have had that experience, even if it's just a niggling thing saying, oh my goodness, I'm at Masada, where 2,000 years ago, Jews would never have been able to suggest that they would be back here. Even if it's just back there, all the way on the spectrum to people who say this is a messianic moment, and here we are, we're in the redemption days. There is a long spectrum between those, but they both partake of this understanding that Brit Zion is something you can see and be immersed in. Brit Zion is specifically not above politics. It includes politics. It includes human frameworks. Not that it tells you exactly what to do or how you have to do it, but it includes human frameworks. It is not about what you do for God. It is about what God is willing to grant to you. And there is a way in which it creates an unconditional bond that God is stuck with, quote unquote, the Jewish people. So if we're going to do bad, we're going to leave the land, but we're always going to come back. And if you have any doubt about it, I want to read you what I think is the most, maybe one of the most touching set of verses in the entire Bible. And there's a lot of competition for that. Anybody here ever hear, actually, I don't want to do that. I was going to say something, I don't want to do that. I want to look at the verses. Number 9. And I want to say, I was going to say something about a Holocaust analogy. But I have to tell you, what I'm trying to do here is to say that Israel is part of Judaism with or without the Holocaust. Israel is not just a response to the Holocaust. Brit Zion is not a response to the Holocaust. It is a religious understanding of a theology that existed very long before any of that happened. Okay? And that's why I'm not going to make an analogy, even though I think rhetorically it would work. Verse 6 in number 9. The story is essentially Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu, a book with among the greatest pathos in all of Tanakh, in all of the Bible. Yirmiyahu is living at a moment where he is telling the people, you do not understand, the Babylonians are going to take over. You have lying and false prophets who are telling you they're not and that God's going to save you. I'm telling you, you're going to have to leave here. He is very sober about that. And he is leading the charge on that and is very unpopular because of that. And within that, this is what happens. Jeremiah 32. They're literally on their way out. Verse 6 in number 9. Vayomer Yirmiyahu. Haya devar Adonai elai lemor. Jeremiah said, God's word was the following to me. Hine Chanamel ben Shalom dodcha ba'elecha. Chanamel, the son of your uncle Shalom, right? It sounds like already the beginning of a joke. Like, Chanamel, you're the son of your uncle Shalom, right? Like we get our ways of talking from somewhere. He's coming to you, lemor, to say, Knei lecha et sadi asher ba'anatot. I want you to buy my field that's in Anatot, in the land of Israel, that they're about to get kicked out of by the Babylonians. Buy my field, because you're next in succession to be able to buy it. Vayavo elai Chanamel ben Dodi, kidvar Hashem, and just as God said, Chanamel showed up. El Chatzer HaMatara, to the prison compound that I was being kept in. He was being kept in a prison compound because the Jews didn't like hearing what he had to say. And that was only after he was saved from a potential lynching. Vayomer Eli says, Knei na et sadeh asher ba'anatot. Please, buy my sadeh, buy my field in Anatot asher be'eretz Binyamin, that is in the land of Benjamin, ki lecha mishpat ha'yerusha. Because really you're an inheritor, ulecha ha'geula, and you have the right to redeem it by buying it. Knei lecha, buy it, ve'eda ki dvar Hashem hu. And I know that this is God's word. So what did I do? Va'eknes, says Yirmiyahu, va'eknet hasadeh me'et Chanamel. I bought the field from Chanamel, my cousin, asher ba'anatot, ben Dodi, asher ba'anatot. Ve'eshkelalo et hakesef, and I paid him, shiva shkalim, v'asara kesef, right? I gave him 17 shekel of silver. We could discuss, was that too much, was that too little? Deflation, inflation, as people are getting kicked out of their land. Va'echtov b'sefer, and I wrote it in a book. Va'echtom, and I sealed it, meaning this is like the document they draw. Va'ed edim, and I had witnesses on it. Va'eshkol hakesef b'moznayim, I weighed the silver and make sure everybody's being honest. Va'akach et sefer ha'mikna, et ha'chatum, ha'mitzvah, ha'chukim, ve'et ha'galui. And I took the deed, the sealed part and the open part, because they wrote their deeds, sometimes sealed them, sometimes kept them open. Va'atein et sefer ha'mikna Baruch ben Neriah ben Machseya, and I gave the deed to Baruch, the son of Neriah, le'enei Chanamel Dodi, in front of Chanamel, ule'enei ha'edim ha'kotvim b'sefer ha'mikna, and in front of the witnesses to the deed, le'enei kol ha'Yehudim hayoshvim b'chatzer matara, and in front of all the Jews who were sitting in the prison compound, I did that. Vatzaveh et Baruch le'eneihem lemor, and I commanded Baruch the following in front of them. Now he's doing something exhibitionist. He doesn't just buy the land, he wants to make a statement in front of everyone why he bought the land. Yudalid 14. Ko amar Adonai Tzvaot Elohei Yisrael. So says God, the host of legions, the God of Israel. Lakoch et asfarim ha'eleh. Take these documents at Sefer HaMikna, Hazeh, Vet HaChatum, Vet Sefer HaGalui, all these different documents, Hazeh. Unitatam b'chli chares, and I want you to put it into a pottery vessel, L'man yamdu yamim rabim, so that it could be kept for a long time, right? How did you keep things? You didn't digitize them. You kept them in a pottery vessel, because that's going to keep them, right? What are the artifacts that we have now? You look at pottery vessels. So we need this to last for a long, long time. Why? Kicho amar Adonai Tzvaot Elohei Yisrael. Because this is what God, the Lord of hosts, says, the God of Israel. Od yikanu vatim v'sadot ukramim ba'aretz hazot. In the future, houses and fields and vineyards shall again be purchased in this land. They are literally getting kicked out by the Babylonians at this moment, packing their bags, having their temple destroyed. And Jeremiah says, let me tell you something about Brit Zion. Brit Zion says this ongoing drama and saga between the Jewish people and God, it will continue, and you will return. And so we're sitting here with two pieces of the Jewish theological covenant, two different covenants, Brit Sinai and Brit Zion. We have one that is otherworldly, outside of human frameworks. It's conditional. It tells us what we have to do. In theory, it can be pretty universal, even if the actual covenant commandments are not. But that's the setup. You can't see it. You have to imagine it. And then you have Brit Zion, this worldly, concrete. You can see it. You can touch it. You can walk its perimeters. It has particular political engagements and challenges. And it is not what we do for God, it's what God gives us. It is a gift. And it is in certain senses not conditional, but unconditional. These two versions of what religion looks like, I'm arguing that they are actually meant to fill each other in. But I know that they can easily compete with each other and are in tension with each other. I think it is very easy for somebody to fall to one or the other. To someone say, let me tell you about my religion. My religion can be done anywhere. God is invisible, not seen in human frameworks. And it is about responsibility, first and foremost, and in theory, it's open to anyone. I could see people going to the other side. My religion is something that is unconditional. God has given me a brit. God has given me a covenant. It is very much within human frameworks. It is very tangible. I can touch it. I can feel it. I can walk it. And in fact, I don't think it's a far cry to suggest that it's much easier for Americans, north or south, and Canadians, north of Americans, sorry, to fall more towards the side of Brit Sinai. And for Israelis to fall more towards the side of Brit Zion. It's not surprising, but they're meant to be together. They're not meant to supersede each other. What does that look like? How do you actually bring these two sides of a theology together when actually they're pushing in such different directions in terms of what religion means, universalism and particularism, the importance of place, whether politics and power have any role in religion or they're actually something that is just gross and we want to get rid of it, right? And we want to try to stand outside of it. They're really competing. And so what I want to do is I want to look at one example, and maybe if we have time, we'll look at another. I want to look at one example of someone who's trying to hold both the Brit Sinai and the Brit Zion. And I want to see what that looks like, okay? And the person I'm going to go to is, I'm going to go to Yirmiyahu. I'm going to go to Jeremiah. Because as much as in Jeremiah 32, he represents somebody who says, I know we're going to come back here because this covenant is forever. He also represents someone who says, hey, I got to introduce a little conditionality into this covenant. You people are going a little far on the Brit Zion side. I need to introduce a little Brit Sinai here, okay? And that's Jeremiah chapter 7, number 11 on your sheet. Hadavar asher haya el Yirmiyahu me'et Adonai lemor. This is what was told to Jeremiah from God. Amod b'sha'ar beit Adonai, stand at the gate of the house of God, meaning at the place that represents Brit Zion, the temple, the place that represents we're here, and God gave this to us, and clearly we're beloved. And I want you to stand there, Amarta, excuse me, sorry. And I want you to read this thing there. And I want you to say, Shim'u dvar Adonai kol Yehuda. All of Judah, listen to God's word. Anybody who's coming here to worship God, I want you to hear what God has to say. Meaning you're coming to this very sensory engaged place, the temple, where you think God is, and you're going to come and you're going to bow, and I'm going to say to you, I'm going to introduce a little bit of listening, Sinai, and I'm going to tell you what are things you need to do that you're not doing. Verse 3. Ko amar Adonai Tzvaot, so says God, the Lord of hosts, Elohei Israel, the God of Israel, Heitivu darchechem u'ma'alelechem, if you mend your ways and your actions, va'ashakna etchem b'makom hazeh, then I will let you dwell here. If, see that if? It's not in Hebrew. It's a command. Do this. But a stipulation, this is what you have to do, but clearly, and if you don't do this, Al tiftechu lachem el divrei hasheker lemor. Do not believe in falsehood, saying Hechal Adonai, Hechal Adonai, Hechal Adonai Hema. But these are God's buildings. How could we possibly get kicked out of this land? Here we are, Brit Zion. We're living it. We're seeing it. Look at this. God is here. We have a temple. How could you? How dare you say to us, we have to mend our ways if we want to stay here? We're here. Ki'im, here's our if, verse 5. Ki'im heitev teitivu et darchechem, because if you do mend your ways, ve'et ma'alelechem, and your actions, im aso ta'asu, mishpat bein ishu bein re'ehu, if you execute justice between people, ger yatom v'almana lo ta'ashoku, if you do not oppress the stranger, the orphan, and the widow, v'dam naki al tishpechu b'makom hazeh, and you do not spill innocent blood in this place, v'acharei Elohim acherim lo telchu, that should not have a little chupchik after the aleph, because it's referring to pagan gods, and after other gods, lo telchu, you do not follow, l'ralachem, for your own bad, meaning if you stop doing all these bad things you're doing, ethically and ritually, because in the Bible, they're connected. If you stop doing all these bad things, Vishikanti etchem b'makom hazeh, I will make sure you dwell in this land. Ba'aretz asher natati labotechem lemin olam va'ad olam. You will dwell in this land forever. Hinei atem botchim lachem al divrei hasheker levilti ho'il. Right now, you are listening to liars. Haganov, ratzoach. You're going to steal. You're going to murder. V'na'of. You're going to commit adultery. V'shaveh l'sheker, you're going to swear falsely. What is he quoting? 10 Commandments. You're going to violate the second half of the 10 Commandments. V'kater l'baal, and you're going to sacrifice to Baal, a false god. V'haloch acharei Elohim acherim asher lo yidatem, and you're going to follow false gods. Verse 10, uvatem v'amadetem lefanai b'bayit hazeh, and you're going to come stand before me in this house, asher nikra shmi alav, that my name, God, is upon, v'amartem, and you're going to say, nitzalnu, we're going to be safe, leman asot et kol hatoevot ha'ela, to do all these bad things. Yirmiyahu says to the people, you can't have Brit Zion without Brit Sinai. You can't have an unconditional covenant that is not going to curb corruption. There is a recognition that once you have this place, this territory in which you live and live out a religious destiny, that part of the Brit, part of the covenant are conditions that in order to stay here, you have to do it right. You have to do it morally. This is Yirmiyahu trying to bring the two of them together. And I have to say that I'm not sure, anybody here in their synagogues say a prayer for the state of Israel? What is the content of that prayer? I'm saying, what's the content? What are you asking for in that prayer? Safety, protection, gratitude, wisdom for the leaders and advisors. I want us to hear all three of those, okay? One, asking for safety. That is very much in all of the language of Brit Zion. Zion, I'm bringing you here to help you and save you, and I'm going to keep you clear from your enemies. We saw it. Gratitude, clearly. Wisdom for the leadership. That's what Yirmiyahu wants to see more of. He wants us to develop religious language for, I would say, not just the old moral questions, like how we treat the orphan and the widow, although, as you heard from Diana yesterday, we've got plenty of problems everywhere on that, but the new moral questions too, right? We don't really have in Tanakh a grappling with, well, what's the morality of how you deal with your enemy or someone who's not your enemy but is family with your enemy and is actually a citizen, right? But what Yirmiyahu, the whole frame of Yirmiyahu would call for is aspirational Zionism within your land, right? That's what he would call for. And I think it is worth developing religious language around that, because I think that's part of putting together the Brit Zion and the Brit Sinai. But what I want to think about in our diaspora communities is, you know, we present Yirmiyahu as he's like some big universalist. And all the prophets we present that way. They're not. They're living in a very particular political framework, Brit Zion, and what they're doing is they're introducing conditions into that political framework. And so what worries me is that we're only harping on the Brit Sinai in the sense of, well, this is what you have to do, this is what you have to do better, this is what you have to do better. But where is an actual appreciation that doesn't come from the Holocaust, but comes from Judaism itself, for what Brit Zion is? I asked a friend of mine who spent a year here with his family, I said, why'd you come for the year? He says, because it seems like the Jews only get to be in their land every 2,000 years. So I thought I wouldn't miss the opportunity. Right? Again, there's a spectrum. There's people who say that and people who say we're in a messianic time. But they're on the same spectrum in a way. And so I want to leave us with a question and with a few suggestions, right? Same Yirmiyahu says, and you're going to leave if you do these bad things, and I need you to do these bad things, is fiercely dedicated to Brit Zion. So fiercely dedicated that he buys a plot of land as he's getting taken away in chains. That is not what the critique of Israel in America is looking like. It is not looking like an appreciation for Brit Zion and Brit Sinai together. Brit Zion is falling out the bottom. And so here's the question. How do we continue to teach Brit Zion, not as a response to the Holocaust, but as part and parcel of the eternal covenant between God and the Jewish people, the same way that Shabbat is, the same way that Tikkun Olam is? How do we keep this commitment front and center, even as we have the kind of moral and religious debates that Yirmiyahu challenged people to have? And now I'm going to say the quiet part out loud. Here's the quiet part out loud. If we teach people that religion is just a way to politics, then religion becomes cheap. But if we teach people that religion does not involve politics or human frameworks at all of power, then religion and Judaism become something it is not. And so the quiet piece that I want to say is, I don't think that we should be teaching Judaism as extraterritorial, as a religion without a place that can be done exactly the same way anywhere, because I don't think it's true. I think we need to be teaching Judaism as a religion that has a robust sense of both of these covenants. Thank you very much.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, Post Office Box 360, Stamford, Connecticut 06904. Or you can call the JBS Pledge Line at 833-MY-JBS-TV. That's 833-695-2788. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. We thank you for your kind support.